Chapter 1. The Car They Mocked. People laughed at my old car for years, including my own son, but none of them knew that behind the peeling paint and rattling engine was the secret I had protected for a decade. I am Marlene Cooper, the silent engineer who built an automotive empire without ever putting my name on the door. And the day my son mocked me in front of his girlfriend was the same day he would watch executives rise to greet me as the architect of the very system his new employer depended on. This is the story of how a single truth shattered their pride, how a rumor nearly destroyed everything I built, and how standing in the light for the first time forced my son to face the person I had always been. The day my son finally said out loud what he had been thinking for years started like 100 other mornings in my life. Ohio's spring light was thin and gray, the kind that made the dew on the grass look like frost from a distance. I stood at my kitchen sink in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, rinsing out my coffee mug, watching the reflection of my own face in the glass. 59. Older than I ever imagined I would feel, and somehow younger than people expected when they looked at my car. The keys were already in my hand when I stepped onto the front porch. My old Chevy Impala waited at the curb. Its silver paint faded to something closer to dull pewter, the clear coat peeling at the edges like tired skin. I had bought that car in 2006. I kept it after my husband died in 2017, even when everyone said I should move on to something more modern, more efficient, more respectable. The Impala outlasted his heartbeat and all the plans we never finished. I was not ready to bury it too. Dylan was leaning against the railing, arms folded across his chest, phone in one hand, even though he pretended he was not checking it every so often. He was 31 and trying hard to look like the kind of man who had everything under control. Next to him, Kelsey pulled her cardigan tight around her gym-toned frame, her messy blonde bun arranged so perfectly casual it had to be deliberate. Both of them turned their heads in unison when they heard the jingle of my keys. "There it is again," Dylan said, almost under his breath, but loud enough that he knew I would hear. "That old boat." He shook his head, not exactly smiling. "You really still drive that thing everywhere, Mom? People see you in that car and think you are glued to the past." He did not say it like a joke. He said it like a verdict. Kelsey gave a small laugh, the kind she used when she was trying to soften something sharp but still wanted it to land. She told me that one of these weekends, she would take me to test drive something respectable, maybe a crossover with leather seats and a digital dashboard, something that would make me feel, in her words, refreshed. Her eyes skimmed over my jeans and cardigan as if the problem was not just the car, but the whole picture. I felt the familiar prickle at the back of my neck, the one that always showed up when people assumed they knew my life from the outside. I wrapped my fingers more tightly around the keys so they would not see my hands twitch. "The Impala runs just fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "It gets me where I need to go." Dylan pushed off the railing and walked a slow circle around the car, like he was inspecting a crime scene. He flicked one chipped spot of paint with his finger and sighed. I could tell he was about to launch into a speech he had rehearsed, probably in late-night texts to Kelsey. "I'm meeting clients now, Mom," he reminded me, as if I had forgotten the job he was trying to grow in sales and marketing for a local agency. "When they see what you drive, they'll assume I'm not doing well. I'm trying to build a serious image here." Image came out like a sacred word. He jerked his chin toward the driveway where his own SUV sat gleaming. It wasn't even his, not really. A long-term lease with payments that always seemed to arrive a little faster than his commissions did. He treated it like a costume he needed to wear in order to be taken seriously. "You could trade this one in," he said, nodding at my car. "Put a down payment on something that doesn't look like a relic. People would respect you more. They would respect me more." Something in me bristled. The idea that respect could be bought in monthly installments offended a part of me I had spent years keeping quiet. But I learned that shouting rarely changed a mind already made up, so I swallowed the reply that burned the tip of my tongue. "It's enough, Dylan," I said. "I like this car. It has taken care of me. I don't need more than that." He rolled his eyes, a gesture I had not seen since he was 16 and unhappy about curfew. Kelsey glanced between us, sensing tension, but not the history underneath it. She smiled again, all teeth and gloss, and said she understood that older people often got attached to things. The way she said older people made it sound like a condition. I unlocked the driver's side door, the familiar click, a small comfort in a morning that felt suddenly hostile. As I slid behind the wheel, I could hear Dylan laughing again, telling Kelsey that he had tried, that he couldn't force me to stop clinging to an old life. They thought they were out of earshot. They forgot sound carried in the quiet of our street. It's like she's determined to look broke, like she wants people to feel sorry for her. The words landed heavier than I expected, not because I believed them, but because for a second I saw myself through his eyes. A widow with an old car, an older house, no visible signs of the kind of success he recognized. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and focused on the one fact that mattered. He did not know what that car had been part of. He did not know anything beyond what I allowed him to see. I turned the key. The engine coughed, then settled into a familiar low rumble. I found strange comfort in every little vibration that newer cars were designed to erase. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a last glimpse of Dylan in the rearview mirror, already turning back to his phone, already distracted by the next notification. The neighborhood thinned out as I drove east, houses giving way to strip malls and storage units, then to the low gray shapes of warehouses and distribution centers. Columbus had a way of looking like a dozen different cities stitched together, and the industrial side was the one my family pretended didn't exist. The rain from the night before had left shallow puddles in the cracked asphalt, reflecting the overcast sky like dull mirrors. My chest was tight, but my hands were steady on the wheel. It had been years since I let myself cry over something Dylan said. The grief for my husband had carved out so much space inside me that smaller wounds barely made it to the surface. Still, there was a particular sting in being judged by the person you had once carried on your hip. He sees a beat-up sedan, I thought. He sees the age of the metal and not the miles it covered. He sees a symbol of failure standing where I know I have built something that cannot be measured by paint and chrome. The Impala had carried me the first day I visited the old warehouse that would become the flagship shop. It had brought me back and forth across town when I met with suppliers, landlords, lawyers who doubted that a middle-aged woman who had taken a break from engineering could build a successful automotive service company. It had parked outside when we signed the first lease in 2015, the day the name of a company that didn't exist yet became real on paper. Prime Track Automotive Services. The world did not know me as its founder. On the documents, it was a partnership between silent investors and a front-facing operations team. That was by design. I had chosen to step back, to stay quiet, to let the brand speak for itself while I worked in the background. My car took the last turn into the industrial park where our main service center lived. Corrugated steel buildings lined both sides of the wide street, their big bay doors rolled up like open mouths. I pulled into the lot where the Prime Track sign rose above a row of more modern vehicles, trucks, SUVs, compact sedans waiting their turn under our lifts. The parking lot asphalt was scarred and sun-faded, but the building itself was immaculate. Glass front office, bright blue trim, the clean lines of a business that knew appearances mattered to customers even when the real work happened under the hood. I parked the Impala in the same spot I always used, close to the side entrance, half shaded by the overhang. As I got out, I could already feel eyes on me from inside. Not judgment, but recognition. Mard, the first tech by the door, said, lifting his chin in greeting. Then his voice dropped as another employee walked past. He added in the lower tone that he thought I might not hear, that the boss is here. I moved 2 fingers in a small gesture, a reminder more than a reprimand. His cheeks flushed and he nodded quickly. The unspoken rules were clear. Customers knew me as a consultant, someone brought in to check on quality control, maybe an investor. They didn't know I was the one who had written the original safety protocols, who had designed half the diagnostic flow they used every day.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. In the reflection of the glass door, I caught sight of my own car sitting crooked among the sleek lines of newer models. It looked out of place, like I sometimes felt standing in the same room as my own success. Old paint, old woman, new world. But I knew what that image covered. I knew the numbers in the books, the contracts on the table, the chain of shops across 3 counties. From the street, from my neighborhood, I was just Marlene Cooper, widow, mother, woman who refused to trade in an aging Impala. In here, in this building with the smell of oil and rubber and coffee brewed too strong, I was something else. My name was on no sign, but my fingerprints were on everything. I took a breath, pushed open the door, and stepped inside, leaving the car and the morning and my son's careless laughter outside with the traffic and the gray Ohio sky. Chapter 2. The Empire Built in Silence. The first thing that hit me was the familiar mix of smells that never really left this building, even after years of upgrades and scrub downs. Warm engine oil, rubber, metal dust, and the faint citrus of the cleaner the front desk staff liked to use. It wrapped around me the second the door closed behind my back, a strange kind of welcome that felt more honest than anything waiting for me at home. The front office was bright. Glass and polished wood and neat rows of chairs for customers who preferred to wait and watch. Behind the counter, Jenna was already juggling 2 phone lines, her eyes flicking up long enough to give me a quick nod of recognition before going back to the computer screen. She knew me as Miss Cooper from corporate, and that was all she ever said if anyone asked. I walked past the front desk toward the hallway that led to the inner offices. The hum of compressors and impact wrenches got louder with each step, a steady metallic heartbeat under my feet. On the left, a big window looked into the main bay. Lifts raised cars into the air, techs moved with practiced efficiency, lights reflected off chrome and steel. This place had been an empty shell when I first saw it, a dusty warehouse with 1 flickering bulb and a cracked concrete floor. Sometimes I still saw that ghost version overlaid on top of what we had built. At the end of the hall, the operations office door was half open. I tapped my knuckles lightly against it and stepped inside. Victor Hayes sat behind the desk with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, staring at a stack of reports like they were a puzzle that refused to solve itself. He was in his mid-40s and carried the calm of someone who had worked in chaos long enough to stop flinching at it. He looked up when he heard me, and the lines at the corners of his eyes softened. "You are right on time," he said as he pushed the papers aside. "I was starting to wonder if that old Chevy finally gave up on you." I sat in the chair across from him and told him the car had earned the right to complain every now and then. Then I asked what was worth dragging me out here before 8 on a weekday. He leaned back, laced his fingers over his stomach, and studied me for a second in that way he had when he was deciding how blunt to be. "We got the preliminary figures back from Continental Freight," he said. "The contract is bigger than we thought. Full maintenance coverage for their regional fleet. We are talking $24 million spread over 5 years if it goes through." I let that number settle.
Years ago, I would have curled my toes inside my shoes hearing something like that, afraid to believe it could ever be real. Now it just felt like confirmation that the long nights and careful choices had been worth something. That is good news, I said. I'm guessing there's a but. Victor nodded and reached for another file on his desk. There's always a but, he agreed. They want to meet the original architect. Their words, not mine. The person who can explain why our systems run the way they do. They said they have done due diligence and they know there was someone before the current board. A small shiver ran down my spine. The original architect. I remembered the way I had written that title down once on a piece of paper and then shredded it because it felt arrogant. I remembered the night we incorporated Prime Track Automotive Services in 2015, my name tucked away behind layers of legal language and holding companies. I thought you were handling that, I said. You've been running operations for years. You know the systems as well as I do. He shook his head slightly. I know the systems you designed, he said. There's a difference. They want to know who decided that every repair ticket has to cross-reference safety bulletins twice before sign-off. They want to know why we invested in early diagnostic simulation when it looked like a waste of money on paper. They want to shake the hand of the person who decided to build this thing the hard way. My instinct was to pull back, the same instinct that had kept my name off press releases and out of magazine profiles. Behind every public success, there was a list of people waiting to attach themselves. And behind that list, there was a smaller one of people who would rather tear it down. I had seen both. I reminded Victor that for a decade, our arrangement had worked. He faced cameras when he had to. The brand had spokespeople. The company had a story that did not require my face. Customers trusted the blue and white Prime Track logo. They didn't need to know the woman who had drawn it on a napkin at her kitchen table one night while her husband slept in the next room. He listened, nodding slowly, then met my eyes directly. We are not a 3-bay shop anymore, he said. We have 16 locations across Central Ohio. Continental is not just buying service hours. They are tying their reputation to ours. They are not wrong to want to look the real decision maker in the eye. The real decision maker. For a second, I saw Dylan again, standing on my porch complaining that my car made him look unsuccessful. The gap between the way he saw me and the way this man across the desk did was large enough to swallow me whole. He hesitated as if he wasn't sure whether to mention what came next. In the end, he decided not to dance around it. There's something else, he said. I thought you should hear it from me. He slid a printout across the desk. It was an application summary from RoadMax Service Centers, our most aggressive competitor in the region. At the top, under applicant name, was my son's handwriting, scanned in, neat and bold. Dylan Cooper, sales and outreach, preferred location, North Side RoadMax, 5 miles from our main shop. My chest tightened a different way this time. When did this come in? I asked. Last week, Victor said. Someone over there forwarded it to one of my contacts as a courtesy. The industry is smaller than people think. What caught my attention was not the application itself, it was the interview notes. He ran a hand along the page until he found the section he meant. He tapped it with one finger. I read the line he indicated. Applicant states that Prime Track is fine for older vehicles and budget-conscious customers, but lacks the polish and technology of larger chains. Applicant believes RoadMax is the future of automotive service in the region. My name was not written anywhere on that page, but the insult still found its mark. Dylan had described my life's work as a place for people who couldn't afford better. It was one thing for him to mock my car in front of his girlfriend. It was another for him to use my company as a stepping stone in a sales pitch for our rivals. Victor watched my face carefully. I know he's your son, he said quietly. I debated not showing you. But if he ends up over there, logging their client data and hearing their strategy meetings, I'd rather you not be blindsided. There was a long moment where neither of us spoke. Outside the office window, I could see Rico, our lead technician, guiding a sedan onto a lift with the same care and focus I remembered from the first day we hired him. Somewhere under all this frustration, there was still pride. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I appreciate it." He asked what I wanted to do. Did I want to talk to Dylan, try to talk him out of it, blacklist him quietly from certain contracts? I shook my head. If he wants to chase shiny logos, he's going to. Forcing him to stay away would only make it worse. He'll learn what he learns. Victor sighed. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and studied me for a second in that way he had when he was deciding how blunt to be. "That brings us back to Continental," he said. "They gave us 2 weeks to schedule a visit. They asked again in their last email who will be in the room to speak for the core systems. We can stall once, maybe, but not forever." His question was not just about a meeting. It was about whether I wanted to step out of the shadow I had spent 10 years standing in, whether I trusted myself to handle the glare that could follow. I told him what had been circling my mind since the moment he said original architect. If I walk into that room, it won't just be about a contract. It'll be the first time my son sees me through someone else's eyes. If that happens before he knows how to value people beyond the surface, he'll think I'm doing it to prove something to him. I don't want my whole career reduced to a point in an argument. Victor considered that for a moment, then nodded slowly. He said he understood that his own father had spent most of his life invisible in a factory, and visibility came with a cost. But there was another cost too, letting other people define your story because you weren't in the room when they told it. He asked me, gently, if I was sure I wanted to keep hiding when the stakes were this high. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood and walked to the window, watching the organized chaos of the shop floor. Young techs in uniforms with our logo on the chest, an older woman at the service counter translating repair estimates into normal language for customers. So many pieces moving in harmony because of a decision I made years ago to design a system that assumed people deserved safety even when they couldn't afford the fanciest car. Part of me wanted to stay exactly where I was, the quiet architect, the ghost in the machinery. Another part knew that everything we had built could be used as proof of something bigger if I was willing to stand next to it without flinching. I told Victor I needed a little time, but that he should tentatively tell Continental we could make a visit work. His shoulders visibly loosened at that, like he had been bracing for a flat refusal. As I turned to leave, Rico, our lead technician, appeared in the doorway. He paused when he saw me, then stepped back politely. I brushed past him into the hallway, the noise of the shop washing over me again. I was halfway toward the side exit when I heard his voice behind me. He was talking to one of the newer apprentices, a lanky kid still unsure of where to stand when the world moved fast around him. "You see that lady?" Rico said, his voice dropping into the tone people used.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Don't you? When they thought they were sharing a secret. She is the reason you have a job. She wrote the safety checklist you are filling out right now. She built this place when it was just an empty warehouse. The kid let out a low whistle. I stopped walking, my back still to them, and closed my eyes for a second. Warmth and panic mixed in my chest. This was exactly what I had told them not to do and exactly what part of me wanted to hear. I turned just enough to catch Rico's eye and lifted that same small gesture with my hand, the one that meant, be careful. His face went red and he nodded quickly, mumbling something to change the subject. Pushing open the side door, I stepped out into the parking lot. The sky had brightened a little, the gray lifting enough to let some weak sunlight through. Across the street, a dark sedan had just pulled up to the curb. I recognized the front grille even before I saw the driver. Dylan sat behind the wheel, one hand on the steering column, staring toward the building. His expression was not the casual annoyance from this morning. It was tighter, more focused, like he was trying to solve a riddle he did not know he had been handed. He could not hear the words from inside. He had not read the contracts or the reports on Victor's desk. All he saw was the way Rico straightened when I walked by, the way Jenna at the front gave me a nod that was closer to respect than politeness,
the way Tex moved aside just a little to let me pass. I watched my son watching me, feeling the space between us shift by a fraction of an inch. Confusion flickered over his face, then something like discomfort. Maybe for the first time, he was considering the possibility that he did not know the whole story. I did not wave, I did not walk over. I simply walked to my old Impala, unlocked the door, and slid in. As I started the engine, I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and searching. They would be questions later, I was sure. For now, uncertainty was enough. It was the crack in the surface that might one day let the truth through. Chapter 3. The Unmasking. A week later, I found myself driving in the opposite direction from the shop, past the familiar warehouses and out toward the interstate, the old Impala humming a little louder than usual. Victor had insisted I should not make the trip alone, so we agreed to meet at the headquarters of Continental Freight, a glass and steel box planted on the edge of downtown Indianapolis. It looked exactly like the kind of place Dylan thought real success lived. The parking garage was already half full when I pulled in. I tucked the Impala in a corner space where it would be less noticeable next to the shiny company sedans. In the elevator, my reflection stared back at me from brushed metal walls. Navy blazer, simple blouse, hair pulled back, no nonsense. I looked like every other middle-aged woman in a corporate hallway, which was exactly what I wanted. Victor was waiting in the lobby, checking his watch. When he saw me, he lifted his eyebrows the way he did when he was trying not to show that he had been nervous. "You made good time," he said. "The car knows the way by now," I answered. He smiled and motioned toward the security desk. After we checked in and clipped visitor badges to our jackets, an assistant led us through a maze of corridors to a conference room with one glass wall and 3 solid ones. The table inside could have seated 12. Today, it held only 2 stacks of paper, 2 bottles of water, and a small device in the center of the table to record the meeting. I took the chair that faced the door. I liked to see who came and went. A few minutes later, the door opened and a man with silver at his temples and the easy stride of someone used to being listened to walked in. For a moment, he studied me without speaking. Then his face broke into a grin I remembered from a different city and a different life. "Marlene Cooper," he said. "I was starting to believe the rumor that you have vanished for good." Hearing my name spoken like that, with the history attached, tugged at something in my chest. I got to my feet and shook his hand. "Last time I saw you, you were yelling at a line of plant managers in Detroit." He laughed. "They deserved it. You did not. The whole controls team took the heat for decisions they did not make, and then you were gone." I heard the unasked question sitting there between us. Why did you leave? Why did you let your career evaporate when the industry needed you? "I had reasons," I said quietly. "A sick husband, a son who needed a parent at home, and more than enough politics in that place to poison anyone who stayed." He nodded as if that matched what he had imagined. Then he tapped the folder in his hand. "And yet, here you are, behind a service company that keeps popping up on every report I read." He took his seat across from me, set the folder on the table, and looked at Victor for the first time. "You must be Hayes. We have spoken on the phone." "Victor is fine," Victor replied, reaching across the table. "And yes, we have." Once the handshakes and small talk settled, the air in the room shifted into something more formal. Caleb opened the folder and pulled out a summary of our proposal, pages marked with neat notes in dark ink. "I will be blunt," he said. "The board wants this partnership. Your numbers are solid. Your safety record is the best in 3 states. The only hesitation they have is that they cannot see who built the core of your system. They see you, Hayes, and they respect your stewardship, but they know there was someone before you." He shifted his gaze back to me. The control algorithms, the diagnostic decision trees, the redundancy layers. Those do not come from a committee. They come from one mind that understands how failure really happens. I felt my pulse in my throat. It was one thing to know my work mattered in the abstract. It was another to hear someone say out loud that they had followed the breadcrumb trail back to me. I told Victor that Continental hires partners, not vendors. If we're going to tie our fleet to prime track, we want to know the architect is still standing. I let the word architect sit there for a heartbeat. There was a time when that title had been written under my name on company docs. There was a time when losing it had felt like losing air. I am still here, I said. I just got tired of having my picture taken. He smiled. I can understand that, he said. The question is whether you are willing to step into the light for long enough to put some worries to bed. Before I could form an answer, movement at the glass wall caught my attention. On the other side, in the corridor, a small group had gathered outside the conference room next door. A young man in a light gray suit was holding a laptop, talking too fast, gesturing in that way people do when they are pitching. A young woman in a fitted black dress hovered just behind him with a folder in her hands. At first, they were just shapes. Then the man shifted just enough that I saw his profile. Dylan. My stomach clenched. What was he doing here? He finished his sentence and handed the laptop to the assistant standing with them. The woman with him, Kelsey, touched his arm, said something that made him grin. They both looked keyed up, hungry. The assistant nodded toward our room and to the one next door, then took the laptop and disappeared down the hall. Dylan turned his head at that exact moment and looked straight through the glass at me. His expression went from neutral to startled so fast it was almost comic. He blinked, frowned, looked at the room number, then back at me, as if he was expecting the reflection to vanish. I could see the calculation in his eyes. Mom, in a corporate conference room, sitting across from a man in an expensive suit. Papers on the table between us. His first assumption would be that I was out of place. The door opened again before he could knock on the glass. The Continental assistant stepped in, carrying a notepad. Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Monroe, your other guests just arrived. The team from Westline Media. Do you want them in here or keep them in room 423? Give us a few more minutes, Caleb said, not taking his eyes off of me. Then I'll see them next door. The assistant nodded and left. Through the glass, I saw her say something to Dylan and point down the hall. He shook his head. His jaw was set now. He pushed the conference room door open without waiting for another invitation. Mom, he said halfway between confused and annoyed. What are you doing here? The word here came out loaded. In his mind, this was his territory. Corporate headquarters, polished floors, serious meetings. Not a place for his mother who drove an old Impala. Caleb leaned back slightly in his chair. Victor went very still. I could ask you the same thing, I said. I'm presenting a campaign, he replied. He gestured toward the hallway. Westline is pitching for Continental's regional branding. This is a logistics company, Mom. Freight, supply chains. You don't even work in this world. Are you lost? The condensation in his voice made something old and stubborn in me sit up straighter. Caleb cleared his throat, drawing Dylan's attention. You must be Miss Cooper's son, he said in a calm voice. I have heard about you. Dylan blinked. Have we met? He asked. Not directly, but I know your last name. Your mother used to run control systems for one of the biggest plants in Detroit. People still talk about the way she handled a recall there. When she disappeared, a lot of us wondered where she went. Dylan looked at me, then back at him. My mom left that job. That was years ago. She works at some little repair place now. Victor shifted slightly in his seat, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Caleb's eyebrows lifted. A little repair place, he repeated. Interesting choice of words. He turned the folder around so it faced Dylan and tapped the Prime Track logo at the top. This little repair place is the reason you and I are in the same building today. Continental is considering giving them full maintenance responsibility for our Midwest fleet. He read the name, then looked up at me again. You work for Prime Track, he said slowly. I knew that. You said you were consulting. But why are you in this room? Why are they talking to you like that? Caleb answered before I could. They're talking to her like that because she designed the system that keeps your neighbors from dying on the interstate when a brake line fails. She's the architect of Prime Track's service model. The room got smaller. For a second, all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Dylan stared at me. His mouth opened and closed without a sound. Kelsey had drifted to the doorway in time to hear that last sentence. Her hand flew to her chest, eyes wide. You're the founder? Dylan said finally. Co-founder, I corrected. There were other investors, other hands, but the spine of it is mine. You never told me. I met his gaze, feeling years of unsaid things pressing up behind my ribs. I never hid it, I said quietly. I just did not bring it up when you were busy measuring worth in car payments and lease terms. I did not want my work to be a weapon in our arguments. For a second, I saw hurt flash across his face, then anger. So you just let me think you were scraping by, he said. Let me worry about you looking poor. You did not worry, I said. You worried about being embarrassed. Silence stretched. Caleb shifted the conversation back before we could spiral any further. As interesting as this is, he said gently, we do have business to finish. He slid a new document out of the folder. The heading at the top read, Letter of Intent. It outlined the terms we had been negotiating for weeks. Service levels, penalties, renewal options. At the bottom, there was a blank line waiting for a signature. The board has agreed in principle, he said. They signed off this morning. What they want now is your name on this as the responsible architect. Not just Prime Track, not just operations. You. Dylan bristled. Hold on, he said. You want her to sign something that big? She is just one person. What if something goes wrong? No offense, Mom, but this is a lot. Caleb looked at him with a kind of patient curiosity. Your mother has been quietly guaranteeing more than this for years. This only makes it official. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I looked at Dylan one more time. You do not think I can handle this, I said. He swallowed. I do not know, he admitted. You never showed me this part of you. That does not mean it wasn't there, I said. And for the record, founder is enough. I put the pen to the line and signed my name. The motion felt like closing a circuit that had been open a very long time. Caleb nodded with satisfaction, slid the document back into the folder, and stood. Thank you, he said. We will have formal copies to your council by the end of the week. Victor, we will coordinate on the rollout schedule. He shook Victor's hand, then mine. When he'd gone, the room felt oddly quiet. Dylan leaned on the back of a chair, looking a little like a boy again, stunned after his first fall off a bike. I have to get to my own meeting, he said. We'll talk later, I guess. I hope so, I said. He and Kelsey stepped out into the hallway. I watched them through the glass for a moment. He was talking too fast, hands moving. She was listening, nodding, glancing back toward our room with the look I couldn't quite read. Victor exhaled slowly beside me. Well, that could have gone worse. On the way down in the elevator, my phone buzzed with a calendar alert I ignored. My head was too full. When we reached the lobby, Victor peeled off to call our attorney. I paused under the high ceiling, letting the noise of the building wash over me. As I walked toward the revolving doors, I heard a familiar voice near the bank of windows that overlooked the parking lot. I slowed just enough to make out the words. No, listen, Kelsey was saying to her phone. You guys at Roadmax keep asking how PrimeTrack keeps landing these contracts. Turns out there's a woman behind it that no one talks about. Her name is Marlene Cooper. She just signed something huge with Continental. I saw it with my own eyes. She laughed softly. If you move fast, you could use this. People love a good secret exposed. I stopped with my hand on the door, the filtered sunlight spilling across the floor in front of me. The day outside looked brighter than when I had come in, but the air around my shoulders felt heavier.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The Truth They Never Expected. I pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the brightness, but it felt like the sun was pressing down on me instead of warming my face. All the way back to Columbus, the words I had overheard circled in my head. Kelsey offering my name like a gossip chip to Roadmax, a story they could spin however they wanted. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my shoulders ached from holding tension in one place for too long. The first hint of fallout came 3 days later. Victor called before 7, his voice tighter than usual. Turn on your laptop, he said, and do not panic. People never preface news like that unless they expect you to panic. I sat at my kitchen table, the Impala still cooling in the driveway from my morning coffee run, and opened my email. He had forwarded a link to a local business blog that liked to pretend it was investigative journalism. The headline sat in bold letters. Regional service chain accused of damaging parts to pad repair bills. Beneath it, a blurry photo of our main shop, and a quote from an anonymous source claiming that PrimeTrack techs were instructed to find extra problems on older vehicles and replace functioning components. My stomach turned. This is garbage, I said into the phone. They do not even have our procedures right. I know, Victor said. But Roadmax has been whispering that story for months in smaller circles. Now, someone has given them a microphone. Continental saw it before I could get ahead of it. They want a full audit of our last year of work orders. Of course they do, I said. He told me that Continental had not backed away from the letter of intent yet, but the board was nervous. If public opinion turned, they did not want to be caught holding hands with the villain of the story. I closed my eyes and pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose. How are the techs taking it? I asked. Badly, he admitted. They're proud of what they do. They read that and hear an attack on their character. Rico almost got into a shouting match with a customer who made a joke about us breaking things on purpose. So it was not just about contracts and numbers. It was about the people whose names were on those tickets. People who lived paycheck to paycheck and did not have the luxury of ignoring what the internet said. We have 2 choices, Victor went on. We wait for Continental's audit and hope the truth sorts itself out quietly, or we go loud first. Loud how? I said, already knowing. Press. You. On a stage. Telling the story. Showing them what we actually do. For years, I had carefully avoided anything that required a podium, a backdrop, cameras staring like unblinking eyes. The idea of stepping into that space made my chest feel too small. But the image of Rico being second-guessed at a counter he had stood behind for a decade, of Jenna fielding calls from worried customers, of my systems being twisted into a scam narrative, stirred something hotter. They are dragging my people through the mud.
I said into the phone, "and they think I'm going to let them do it while I hide behind a glass wall?" Victor was quiet for a beat. "So, that's a no on waiting?" he said. "Set it up," I told him. "If Roadmax wants a story, we will give them the whole one." 2 days later, the conference bay at our headquarters had been transformed. The lifts had been pushed back, a portable stage brought in, a simple backdrop hung with the Prime Track logo repeated in a pattern. Rows of folding chairs faced the podium. Cables snaked across the concrete floor to cameras and microphones stamped with local news logos. I stood behind the curtain of a hastily erected divider, smoothing the front of my blazer, feeling my heart beat low and heavy. Victor hovered at my shoulder. "You still have time to change your mind," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm tired of letting other people describe what we built." He squeezed my arm once, then stepped out to speak with a woman adjusting a tripod. A minute later, he signaled to me. It was time. The murmur of voices swelled as I walked onto the small stage. The lights were not as harsh as the ones I remembered from Detroit, but they still made the air feel thinner. I took my place behind the podium, looked out over the sea of faces, and found the one anchor I needed. A dark-haired woman with a notepad and a Channel 9 badge, watching me with clear, assessing eyes. She raised her hand. "Amanda Lee, Columbus 9, she said when I nodded. "Before we get to the technical side, the first question everyone is asking is simple. Who are you? For 10 years, Prime Track has been a brand without a visible founder. Why?" I took a breath. "My name is Marlene Cooper. I'm the founder and lead systems engineer for Prime Track Automotive Services." The room stirred. Pens moved faster. Someone clicked a camera. I let it wash over me and forced myself not to grip the edges of the podium. I spent almost 2 decades in Detroit, designing control systems for a major auto manufacturer. In 2015, after a series of recalls and a round of layoffs that gutted half my team, I walked away. My husband was sick. My son was drifting. The company was happy to let a woman take the blame for decisions made far above her pay grade. I kept my voice even as the memories came. The long nights in fluorescent light, the way executives had smiled for cameras while pushing engineers in front of microphones to apologize. We moved here. My husband died a year later. I had a choice: let my skills rot or build something on my own terms. So I chose this, a service chain that treats every work order like a safety issue, not a sales opportunity. That is why we built multiple cross-checks into every system. That is why our techs have authority to refuse unsafe shortcuts. That is why our failure rate is what it is. Amanda nodded. "And why hide your role all this time? Why not stay in the background if you care this much?" I paused, picking my words carefully. Because I needed a break from being the face of anything. Because sometimes the only way to get real work done is to let the work speak louder than the person behind it. And because I was a single mother, trying to raise a son without making every conversation about what her mother had accomplished. I didn't want my career to become another stick to beat him with. There was a small tightening in my throat at that last line, but I pushed through. A few people in the front row exchanged glances. Amanda scribbled something and then looked up again. "You have been accused of instructing your techs to damage parts in order to increase revenue. What do you say to the customers who are scared that's true?" I nodded to Victor, who stood near the edge of the stage. He lifted a remote and pointed it at the screen behind me. The backdrop flickered, replaced with a live feed from our diagnostic bay. A car sat on a lift and overlay graphics showed the data flowing from its sensors into our system. "This," I said, turning slightly so the room could see, "is what actually happens when a vehicle comes into our shops. Before any human hands touch a wrench, our scanners run a full baseline check. Every reading is recorded and time-stamped. Any part flagged for replacement has a data trail a mile long. Our internal policy is that if a tech cannot explain a recommendation with both data and physical evidence, that work doesn't happen. I motioned and the video cut to a second segment, one we had prepared with our software vendor. It showed a simulated attempt to alter a reading and the system immediately tagging it as an anomaly. If anyone here believes a company like ours could systematically damage parts without a digital fingerprint, they don't understand how tightly this is built. We invited an independent auditor in as soon as these rumors started. They will have full access to a year of tickets, so will Continental. There was a murmur of approval from a few corners. One reporter whispered to another and nodded at the screen. From the back of the room, near the doors, a voice called out, "Is Continental still planning to work with you?" Before I could answer, another voice cut in from the side, firm and familiar. Caleb stepped forward, no tie today, his badge clipped to his belt. "Continental is not just planning to," he said. "We are expanding the scope. The board met this morning. Based on PrimeTrack's transparency and the systems we have reviewed, we are increasing our proposed fleet coverage and the value of the agreement. We wouldn't do that if we believed they were playing games with safety." Heads turned, cameras swung toward him. Amanda was almost pleased to have gotten more than she expected. I felt something ease in the center of my chest. It was not victory, just relief that the ground under my feet was not as fragile as the rumors made it seem. As the formal questions wrapped up, I stepped away from the podium. The room dissolved into clusters of conversation. Tex, who had watched from the back, clapped me on the shoulder as they passed. Victor squeezed my hand quickly. That's when I saw Dylan. He stood near the side wall, half behind a pillar, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. Kelsey wasn't with him. His hair was a little out of place, as if he'd rushed over. When our eyes met, he hesitated, then threaded his way through the thinning crowd until he was close enough that we could speak without others hearing. "Mom," he said.
I heard on the radio they were doing a story on PrimeTrack. I did not realize they meant you until I saw your name on the crawl. I nodded, not trusting myself to say much yet. He glanced back at the stage where the equipment was being shut down. "Why did you never tell me all of this?" he asked. "Did you really think I would not be proud of you?" The question hung there, heavy, not accusing exactly, but full of every missed opportunity between us. "I thought," I said slowly, "that you needed to learn how to respect people without a list of their accomplishments. You spent a lot of time judging me and everyone else by what they drove, how shiny their lives looked from the outside. I did not want my career to become just another number in that scorecard." His jaw tightened. "So you hid it," he said. "From me." "I protected it. From you. And I protected you from thinking that the only reason to value someone is because of what they can put on a resume." He looked down at his shoes. For a moment, he seemed younger, shoulders slumped, the fight gone. "I am not proud of some of the things I said," he admitted quietly. "About your car, about this place. I did not know. You did not want to know," I said softer than before. "There is a difference." He did not argue. The noise of the cleanup swelled and fell around us. Somewhere behind me, Amanda laughed at something Caleb said. The lights were being dimmed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Victor caught my eye and held up his own, indicating the same call. We both stepped a little aside and answered on speaker. Caleb's voice came through, clear. "The board voted," he said without preamble. "We are finalizing the agreement this week. We are adding 2 additional regions. The total value is going up by about $4 million. Congratulations, Marlene. Try to get some sleep tonight." When the call ended, I slid the phone back into my jacket. Dylan had heard enough from my side to understand. "So it is real. All of it." I said it has been real for a long time. You're just seeing it now. He nodded slowly, eyes searching my face,
like he was trying to reconcile two versions of me at once. For the first time in a long time, he did not rush to fill the silence with excuses or jokes. He just stood there, in the middle of my world, not quite sure where to step next.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5: The Lesson and the Return. A week after the press conference, the air inside our main service hub felt different, lighter somehow, as if someone had opened a window after years of keeping everything sealed tight. Prime Track was hosting a thank you event for employees and partners, a gathering we had planned months ago, but that now felt almost symbolic. Strings of warm lights hung from the beams above the service bays, and long tables had been set out with food from a small catering company run by a former customer of ours. Mechanics who usually kept to themselves in the back rooms were laughing near the coffee urns. Service advisors mingled with vendors and auditors, everyone talking like they were part of the same long story. It was the first time in years that the company felt whole. I stood near the edge of the room with a plastic cup of punch in my hand, watching the crowd move in waves. People nodded to me with the respect that was no longer quiet or hesitant. They knew who I was now, not just in an abstract sense, but in a way that tied me to them. Their work was connected to mine. Their pride was connected to mine. I felt it like a warmth blooming in my chest. I was speaking with Caleb about scheduling the first integration check for the new contract when I saw Dylan walking toward me from the far end of the room. He was not rushing or puffing up his chest the way he used to when he felt defensive. He moved slowly, hands loose at his sides, his expression open in a way I had not seen since he was a teenager. There was no sign of Kelsey with him. Caleb caught my glance and stepped back politely, giving me space. Dylan stopped in front of me and let out a breath. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded and led him toward an empty corner near the tool lockers, where the noise of the party softened to a low hum. For a moment, he just looked around at the space, taking in the banners, the lights, the people who had built this place with their hands and their trust. His eyes moved along the walls, the lifts, the polished floors, all the signs of a company that had grown from nothing but a blueprint and stubborn hope. "I owe you an apology," he said, finally. His voice wavered. "I thought I understood what mattered. I thought the world judged you by the car you drove or the title you could flash. I was trying to build something for myself and I got lost along the way. And I forgot that you had already built something real. Something that helps people every day." He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. "When all of this came out, Kelsey told me she did not want to date a guy who was threatened by a successful woman. She said I needed to grow up before I ruined every relationship I touched. She left the next morning." I folded my arms, not out of anger, but to steady the rush of sadness and relief inside me. I had not wished heartbreak on him, but I had hoped he would someday outgrow the version of himself that had been chasing attention instead of purpose. "I am sorry again," he said, "for everything I said, for everything I assumed, for not asking who you were when you were right in front of me." I let a breath slip out. "Thank you," I said. "It means something to hear you say that. But an apology is not a finish line. It is a step." "I know," he said. He looked up, meeting my eyes with a steadiness I had not seen in years. "I want to work here," he said. "I want to start over. Learn what this really is, not the version I made up in my head. I do not want a special position. Just give me a shot somewhere real.
somewhere I can earn something instead of pretending I already have. A softness unfurled in me at those words, but I kept my tone firm. If you work here, you start like everyone else. Inspection bay, early mornings, dirty hands. You will not use my name to skip steps. He nodded so quickly it almost startled me. I do not want shortcuts. I want a chance. Then you will have it, I said. He let out a shaky breath as if he had been holding it since the moment he walked in. We stepped outside a few minutes later to get some air. The sun was dropping, painting the western sky in gold and rust. The parking lot was full of employee cars, everything from old minivans to new brand new trucks. My Impala sat near the back fence, looking small and stubborn among the newer models. Dylan walked beside me and stopped next to it. He ran a hand along the weathered paint, his face thoughtful. "I want to buy you a new car," he said. "Something safe and reliable. Something that reflects what you deserve." I smiled, the kind that came with an ache behind it. "This car is safe. It took your father to every treatment. It took Lee to every meeting that built this company. It tells the story of where we started, and I don't want to replace that." He looked at the dents and the sun-bleached trim again, but this time his expression held no embarrassment, only understanding. "At least let me bring it in," he said. "The guys in diagnostics have that new simulation program. I can run a full restoration plan. New seals, new hoses, updated suspension, no paint changes unless you want them, just giving it the care it deserves." I touched his arm gently. "I would like that," I said. Behind us, the sound of applause drifted through the open bay doors. Someone had made a toast. The warm lights flickered against the tools hanging on the walls. As we headed back inside, Victor approached me with his phone still in his hand and a look on his face that told me he had news. He lowered his voice slightly, though the pride in it carried enough volume on its own. "Just got off the call. Continental finalized the full expansion. They want you on the National Advisory Council for Maintenance Safety Standards. First meeting is in Chicago next month. They said it was long overdue." For a moment, I felt the world tilt. Not in shock, but in a slow, steady realization. The path that had started in a Detroit warehouse, detoured through grief and single motherhood, stumbled through years of invisibility, had led here. A room full of people who trusted me. A son who was beginning to see me clearly. A future I had not dared to imagine even when I designed systems that predicted failure before it happened. I stood in the middle of the shop floor and let the sound of voices swell around me. Some were laughing, some were talking about the new contract, some were planning next week's schedule. All of them were part of a life I had built, screw by screw, line by line, decision by decision. Dylan stepped beside me, hands in his pockets, quietly absorbing it all. "I had no idea how much of you is in this place." "That was the point. You were supposed to grow into your own life, not mine. But somewhere along the way you learned the wrong markers for worth. Now you get a chance to learn the right ones." He nodded. I could see the determination forming behind his eyes. The evening drifted toward its close. Employees gathered for a final group picture. Someone handed me a microphone to say a few words, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel the urge to hide in the shadows. I spoke about beginnings, about loss, about choosing to build a future even when it meant tearing parts of an old life apart. I spoke about the people who had stood by me, the people who had recently learned who I was, and the people who would carry this place forward long after I was gone. When the applause faded, I glanced at Dylan. He gave a small nod, not seeking approval, but offering it. As the lights dimmed and people began to leave, I felt a calm settle around me, the kind that comes only when a story has run full circle. Looking back on everything, from the day I left Detroit to the morning my son mocked my old car, from the moment I was invisible to the moment I stood on a stage and told the truth, one lesson rose above the rest. Every journey carries its own quiet message. Sometimes we need to stumble before we understand it. And the greatest revenge is never about hurting anyone. It's about standing firm in who you are and letting your truth outlast every doubt. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts, stay with us, and let the next chapter of these journeys unfold together.